Shut up and sit down.
Hey everybody, Karl Groves here. I'd like to start this video with a discussion about my personal mission statement, my purpose, my calling. I know that sounds pretentious. My personal mission in life, the thing that drives me and motivates me, is to help others. And the best way I know how to help people, and the way that I'm most useful in helping people, is to help them with my technical knowledge. As a developer, I can spend my days writing code and I can make a respectable living doing that. Or I can focus on using those technical skills in a direction that actually improves things for other people. As an accessibility consultant, I can actually help multiple groups of people at the same time. By using my technical knowledge to provide high quality, well-informed advice to my customers, I'm helping them to become compliant with legal and regulatory obligations, and at the same time, I'm also helping to improve access to ICT products and services for people with disabilities. So the customer wins, the user wins, and I win. So I feel a very strong and highly personal responsibility around accessibility. Frankly, I feel protective over both my customers and potential customers and users. When it comes to business, I get frustrated when I lose a deal to TPG, DQ, or Level Access because I'm a really competitive person. But when I lose a deal to anyone other than those three, I get frustrated because I feel like the customer may have made a bad decision. To be clear, I'm not saying that Tenon, TPG, DQ, and Level Access are the only good accessibility consulting firms out there. It's just that I know their work. And of course, I believe that my own company is the best, but I also know that for the most part, the other competitors do good work as well. For other companies, I just don't know. I do know, however, that there are a lot of people entering this field because they think it's a hot market to be in, and they're right. The preposterously high number of ADA lawsuits that have been going on for the last few years has created a fertile market for new providers. There's just one problem. This shit is no joke. If anything, the amount of ADA lawsuits that are happening should be a warning to anyone thinking they can just hang a shingle and start calling themselves an accessibility consultant. Because when you charge your customer thousands of dollars for consulting and they follow your advice and they still get sued, you better have a good explanation why. So that takes me to the purpose, the reason for this video. Recently, there's been some discussion around a Medium post that presents a new alternative to WCAG and presents another standard, the Web Accessibility Standards, or WAS. So, rightfully, this has gathered a lot of negative attention by people in the accessibility field. But I want to spend a few moments on this video talking through the facts about why this purported alternative is a terrible idea. Initially, I wanted to make a video where I basically eviscerated the author of this silly proposal. After all, this so-called alternative is really just a preposterously ill-informed idea written by someone with literally 4 months of time in the accessibility field and has absolutely zero experience whatsoever in standards making processes. Instead, I think we'll just focus on the proposal itself. Before we begin, though, I want to be transparent. I have participated in a handful of W3C working groups in the past. My involvement, however, has been very brief, and in each instance I've left because I just don't have the stomach for the standards making process. There's always lots and lots and lots of talking and not enough execution, in my opinion. But that actually says more about me than it does the standardistas. I have massive respect for people who develop standards and for those people who have the patience to deal with all that stuff. We badly need people like that. It's just that my personality doesn't do well there. So in other words, I don't feel any sense of ownership over WCAG. There are things I love about it. There's things I hate about it. There's things I tolerate and accept. And like any other standard, it can be improved. So what I'm saying is that it is right and fair to criticize WCAG. That said, I want to address the statements made by the author of this WAS. So, first, he says, WCAG has big flaws. There's not much to say there. I mean, I'm not sure I'd characterize WCAG's flaws as big. He says, WCAG is not the law for private entities in the United States. And this line, this should be the first sign that this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And frankly speaking, this is somewhat shocking considering the author of this missive is supposedly a lawyer. But the fact is that strictly speaking, it isn't a law anywhere. It's not a law. To be really pedantic, it's a W3C recommendation and an ISO standard. However, WCAG's place in laws and regulations worldwide is well established. Globally, WCAG exists as part of laws in Australia, Canada, China, the European Union, Finland, France, Ireland, Italy, Israel, Germany, Japan, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Korea, Sweden, the UK, and the US. Specific to the United States, WCAG is incorporated by reference into Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. Specific to the ADA, it is correct, strictly speaking, to say that there is no specific technical standard defined in the actual text of the ADA. This is not the same as this person's implied claim that WCAG is not necessary for compliance with the ADA. Sticking only to actual DOJ resources, you can see WCAG being used as the conformance standard called for in numerous consent decrees and settlement agreements where the DOJ took legal action against companies like Peapod, H&R Block, and edX. In addition, the DOJ's enforcement activities under Title II of the ADA, which covers state and local governments, all call for compliance with WCAG. Next, in resources on ada.gov that provide guidance for state and local governments, that guidance points to Section 508 standards, which are, you guessed it, WCAG standards. Finally, there's the practical reality. Every single legal settlement or judgment for the plaintiff in ADA lawsuits calls for WCAG compliance as the standard for the settlement. So, strictly speaking, is WCAG a law? No. Is it explicitly mentioned in the ADA? No. But the practical reality is that if you are sued for alleged civil rights violations under the ADA and you lose, it will be WCAG that you will be told that you must comply with. Pretty straightforward on that one. So moving on, our article author says, Assistant Attorney General, Section 508.gov, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals say private entities have flexibility in how they make their website accessible. Well, no. So first off, there's an easy one. I have no idea where the hell this guy thinks that Section 508.gov says anything about private entities. In fact, Section 508 has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with private entities, and this alone is further evidence that you should be very suspicious about anything that he says. But let's talk about the author's mention of what the Assistant Attorney General actually said. So, on September 25th, 2019, the Assistant Attorney General delivered a response to a letter that the DOJ had received from 103 members of Congress. Their concern, and rightfully so, was that there is ambiguity in the ADA around how to define the technical conformance criteria for the ADA and web accessibility. Now, I could go on for about 20 minutes about the history behind this topic, but it all boils down to the one thing we've already discussed. The ADA does not reference a technical standard, and that makes it hard to judge compliance. I agree with this completely, and I hope it gets resolved. But here's what the Assistant Attorney General actually said. He says, Absent the adopting of specific technical requirements for websites through rulemaking, public accommodations have flexibility in how to comply with the ADA's general requirements of non-discrimination and effective communication. Accordingly, non-compliance with a voluntary technical standard for website accessibility does not necessarily indicate non-compliance with the ADA. So I'm not really sure what drives our article author's belief that this somehow means that WCAG is not necessary. Strictly speaking, I agree with the conclusion that the position of the DOJ is that WCAG compliance is not required for ADA compliance. But there's another thing to take away from this statement. The single most important thing for ADA compliance is accessibility. In other words, accessible is compliant. And this is something I've been saying for a long time anyway. WCAG itself is not the destination. It's a roadmap. In fact, the WCAG standard alludes to this in the section 0.2, Layers of Guidance, where they say this. Note that even content that conforms at the highest level, AAA, will not be accessible to individuals with all types, degrees, or combinations of disability, particularly in the cognitive, language, and learning areas. Authors are encouraged to consider the full range of techniques, including the advisory techniques, as well as to seek relevant advice about current best practice to ensure that web content is accessible as far as possible to this community. So the natural, logical conclusion of these two statements, the one by the DOJ and the one by WCAG, is that if someone was to claim to have made an alternative standard to WCAG, surely it would be more complete. Surely it would be more strict. Surely it would close some of those gaps people complain about when it comes to low vision accessibility and cognitive accessibility coverage in WCAG. Surely our article's author is going to give us something that leads us to a more inclusive website better than WCAG can. And so the original, he's edited this post since the original, but the original text in here would be, it says, the Web Accessibility Standards is a simpler, non-technical alternative to WCAG. Now he says it's an easy-to-read, non-technical alternative to WCAG. Either way, it's the same. Non-technical alternative to WCAG. Dude, there are two areas where accessibility happens: the design and the technical implementation of that design. He says, it's hard to read. It takes a long time to read. It's way too technical. It's overly burdensome in some regards, and it's majorly lacking in others. That's kind of how standards go, right? I mean, wait. Did you think that an internationally recognized standard describing the various traits and patterns required to ensure access for 1 billion people with a massive array of disabilities, combination of disabilities, each with varying challenges relating to computers and varying severities of those challenges, did you think that was going to be easy to read? Did you think that was going to be a short document? Even better, did you think that such a standard, the kind of thing that has been incorporated into the procurement laws mandating how the governments of the world's largest economies, was going to be an easy read? Think about this for a second. The United States government spends around $95 billion on IT stuff each year. Companies like SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, Adobe, and IBM make hundreds of millions of dollars each every year off of government IT sales. Did you really think a standard that is incorporated into by reference into a law that dictates how that government IT spending happens is going to be a quick read? Here's a reality check. Yeah, I understand that reading WCAG is nowhere near as exciting as reading Don Quixote, but it's kind of how it goes with standards. A web standard is a normative specification for how things must work. This kind of stuff impacts over 4.5 billion people across the globe. This isn't the kind of thing to take lightly. You want to know why WCAG is so technical? It has to be. Oracle, IBM, the US Access Board, Google, Microsoft, Adobe, MITRE, SAP, about a dozen accessibility-related companies, as well as assistive technology vendors, disability rights organizations, educational institutions, government agencies, and a slew of various other individual invited experts were all involved in the creation of WCAG. All in all, over 100 people participated in the W3C working group that created WCAG. Let that sink in for a minute. Over 100 people across the globe collectively got together once a week from approximately the summer of 2001 to December 2008 to construct WCAG 2.0, and over the course of approximately 3 to 4 years for WCAG 2.1. That actually follows the efforts for WCAG 1.0 that ran from 1997 to summer of 2001. And the initial source for what became WCAG 1.0 was a document called the Unified Website Accessibility Guidelines that was assembled by the Trace Research Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1995. Going back even further, many of the core principles of accessible technology, especially on the web, were being discussed as early as 1991 with the ICADD, the International Committee for Accessible Document Design, where they were discussing accessibility within SGML. And this was before the W3C even existed. And some of those people involved in those earliest efforts are still involved in the development of web accessibility standards. So what I'm saying is this. WCAG is an internationally recognized standard that has been incorporated into law in 12.5 countries and the entire European Union. It's the work product of over 100 people representing some of the largest software companies on the planet, as well as government agencies, educational institutions, AT companies, and experts in the field. Many of those who've been involved have devoted their entire life to, or their entire career at least, to improving the accessibility of the web. One single person who has no more than 4 months of experience in accessibility simply does not have the knowledge or experience to replace that. It's preposterous in the extreme for anyone to think that they can. And in fact, it's even more evidence that such a person doesn't know what they're dealing with. Or perhaps I'm being unfair. So let's dive a little bit more into what this supposed alternative says. He has since edited this again, but what I do want to mention here is that originally he said, whereas WCAG has 38 more convoluted and vague success criteria, WCAG has 30 more binary yes and no requirements. And I think our author meant 78. I mean, I hope he meant 78 because WCAG 2.1, that has 78 success criteria. Okay, so going back to our so-called alternative, his 30 criteria are broken down into 5 categories. Website presentation, which has 7 things. Website appearance, which has 4 things. Content alternative, which has 6 things. User control, which has 7 things. Website accessibility, which has 6 things. So what we see in the 30 items in this alternative are things that are ridiculously vague, inconsistently worded, irrelevant, ill-informed, or unreasonably restrictive. And I'd like to highlight a couple of these. So under content alternatives, he says all meaningful images on a website must have alt text. And if anything, this is actually less clear and less likely to lead to an accessible website than WCAG, which, as my last video explained, declares that it is any non-text content which needs an alternative. It isn't just images that need a text alternative, but anything presented in a purely visual means. And this could actually include things that are in the markup as text characters, but they just don't represent anything pronounceable or recognizable as text. And you might think that this distinction is splitting hairs, but you know what this includes? It goes beyond images, and it includes icon fonts and Unicode characters. Do you ever experience these things? Yeah. You're experiencing those things on the very page you're viewing this video on. In that same section, number 6, it says extraneous documents. It says all documents such as PDFs, PowerPoint presentations, Excel files, Microsoft Word documents, etc. meet basic respective accessibility requirements. Well, first off, etc. That's not very clear. Etc. is actually vague. But these things are supposed to meet basic respective accessibility requirements. Which respective accessibility requirements? Did you mean the WCAG requirements? Okay, so up next in the section on usability, number 2 says focus indicator. Focus indicator box shows on all links and fields. Unfortunately, our author has apparently forgotten about the existence of other types of interactive elements on a website. So the Way ARIA specification, for instance, defines 29 possible widget roles. And while many of those roles correspond to what our author says are fields, 9 of them are composite widgets that need to have focus indication as well. In addition, there's this whole thing about the author's requirement for a focus indicator box. This is overly restrictive. A visible focus indication can take many forms. It doesn't necessarily need to be plain old box. So ultimately, reading through this, what our author has done is take WCAG, strip out the things he doesn't like or doesn't understand, oversimplify the rest, and add 2 ill-considered requirements of his own. And one of the things he apparently doesn't like is audio description. So here you go. He says, further, in contrast to WCAG, I left out separate audio versions of video and audio descriptions. His reasoning? Such requirements are extremely costly to produce and would greatly suppress the amount of video available online. Really? So all in all, this so-called alternative is no alternative at all. A website that conforms to this purported standard will not be accessible. And this actually takes me to the conclusion, or almost the conclusion of this video. So people who follow me online know I'm not a big fan of gatekeeping. The accessibility field in particular has a bad habit of expecting perfection in anything that involves accessibility. There often appears to be no such thing as good enough to people in the accessibility field. And at the same time, like any other field, new people often make mistakes. And in the case of accessibility, they get eaten alive for it. I make plenty of mistakes myself. I've made plenty in the past. I continue to do it. It's the kind of thing, it's the kind of field that you can always learn more in. So I know that there's no shortage of irony that I've spent the last few minutes harping on this thing that is basically the work the work of someone who is obviously new. But this takes me back to the message from the opening of this video. And that is that this alternative standard isn't just a mistake of a newbie. This person's selling certification. Every single day in the United States, approximately 40 new ADA lawsuits are filed in federal courts. Since October 2015, many hundreds of lawsuits have been filed and many hundreds of demand letters have been sent threatening a lawsuit. Every morning at 9 a.m., I get an automated email that notifies me of new ADA lawsuits. Every major retailer in the United States has been sued or settled. Walk through your favorite mall and I can guarantee all of them have been sued. The same goes for most major banks. But it gets worse. As time has gone on, more and more small businesses have gotten sued. In fact, at Tenon, we have some customers where the company has only one employee. And we have some customers who've had to deal with ADA trolls a half dozen times. When these people get sued, they need to have someone they can go to that will help solve their problem. They need the problem solved quickly and correctly, and not just so they can deal with the current legal problem, but also to avoid more legal problems in the future. What they don't need is to pay for a bogus certification based on half-baked, poorly documented standards written by a guy who's been in this field for 4 months. There is no certification that holds any value or that mitigates any legal risk, and there is no alternative to WCAG.